Only I came to my husband's funeral, not our son, not our daughter, not even one grandchild, just me, standing beside the coffin, watching the wind move through the empty chapel, as if even the air itself couldn't bear to stay. The seats were all empty, lined up neatly, like a cruel joke about what family used to mean. The pastor's voice cracked once, and the echo was louder than the words. I didn't cry, because the kind of pain I carried that morning didn't have tears left. Edward would have hated the fuss. He would have looked around, frowned, and asked, "Where the hell are the kids?" I asked myself the same thing, and then my phone buzzed. "Sorry, Mom, something came up. That was Michael." No punctuation, no warmth, just another errand on his to-do list. Diana didn't message at all, but 2 hours later, I saw her face smiling on social media, brunch with the girls, mimosas, sunshine, laughter, while her father's coffin lowered into the ground. That's when I realised I had raised children who knew how to post condolences online, but not how to show up in person. And yet, someone did come, a stranger, a young man who placed a single white rose on Edward's casket and whispered something before walking away. I didn't recognise his face, but something in me knew. This story wasn't finished, because sometimes the ones who remember you aren't the ones who share your blood. And what happened after that day, what I found hidden in Edward's study, changed everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty and love. Before I tell you that secret, I want to ask you something. If the people you loved most forgot you when you needed them the most, what would you do? Would you forgive them? Or would you finally set yourself free? Stay with me. Because the truth I discovered after that funeral was not what I expected. And at the very end of this story, there's a message I promise you'll never forget. So if you've ever felt unseen, unheard or forgotten by the people you loved, subscribe and stay close, because what's coming next isn't just about loss, it's about reclaiming peace and maybe, just maybe, finding love again where no one thought it could still exist. When the service ended, the wind outside the chapel was colder than I remembered. It pressed against my coat like an old friend reminding me that even warmth can't stay forever. The undertaker asked softly, "Would you like a few more minutes, Mrs. Lewis?" I shook my head. No, I'd already had a lifetime of minutes. None of them could change what had just happened. The chairs stayed empty, 5 rows of silence staring back at me. I kept thinking how Edward would have straightened them himself if he'd been there. He hated disorder, even in sorrow. When the hearse doors closed, I followed it alone, my heels clicking against the stone. Every sound echoed like it belonged to someone else's life. At home, the stillness greeted me first. Edward's slippers were still by the armchair, neatly side by side, waiting for feet that would never return. His glasses rested on the table beside yesterday's newspaper, and on the counter, a half-finished crossword puzzle, 3 empty squares that would never be filled. I poured myself a cup of coffee. Though I didn't want it, habit is cruel like that. It doesn't care who's gone, it just keeps happening. My phone blinked on the table. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. Michael's post, a wide grin. Champagne glass raised, a caption beneath, "Deal sealed." Big weekend ahead. The comments were full of congratulations. Then Diana's update. Her with 3 friends, all smiles, all sunlight. Self-care Sunday. Remember to choose happiness. I stared until the screen went dark. Then I whispered to the silence, "You did choose, didn't you?" The house felt heavier after that. I walked into the kitchen and noticed the vase on the table, white lilies that should have gone to the church but didn't. The delivery service had mixed up the address, and by the time I realised it was too late, so they sat here, blooming beautifully in the wrong place, just like everything else in my life. I sat down and opened the small wooden box Edward used to keep bills in. Inside were letters, Old ones from when we were first married. He had a way of writing that made even the ordinary sound important. Remember, Maggie, one letter said, home is not a house. It's who waits inside it. I closed the box and laughed softly. The kind of laugh that breaks halfway through, because now, no one was waiting. The afternoon light crawled across the living room floor. It was strange how grief can make hours feel like decades. I tried turning on the TV, but the sound of people laughing felt wrong, almost disrespectful, so I turned it off and listened to the quiet hum of the refrigerator instead. That's when I noticed something new. A small white envelope under the door. No name. Just a simple wax seal pressed with the letter E. I thought it might be from the funeral home. But when I opened it, there was only one sentence, written in a careful hand. He mattered to more people than you know. There was no signature. Just that. And for the first time that day, I felt something besides sorrow. Curiosity. Who wrote it? Who still cared enough to slip it under my door while I was burying my husband? The only name that came to mind was that young man from the funeral, the one who left the single white rose. I poured another cup of coffee and sat by the window, waiting for night to fall. The street outside was quiet, except for the occasional passing car. I wondered if Michael or Diana would call. Maybe guilt would find them before the day ended, but it didn't. The phone stayed silent, so I wrote a list instead, something Edward used to do when life felt too big. At the top I wrote, "What's left?" Underneath I listed the house, the savings, the garden, the memories. And me. 5 items, the same number as the empty chairs at his funeral. Maybe that was the universe's way of keeping score. By evening, I opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving for our 50th anniversary next spring. It felt wrong to drink it alone, but I did anyway. The taste was sharp, honest, too real. I lifted the glass toward Edward's chair and whispered, "You were right. Family does show up, just not always the ones we expect." The next morning, when I woke, I walked to his study. The air still carried the faint scent of cedar in his cologne. I stood there, unsure why, until my eyes caught the edge of a folder on the desk, cream-coloured, labelled Estate. It was sticking out just enough to notice, almost like it wanted to be found. I reached for it, hands trembling slightly, and I thought, maybe that's where I'll start. If I was the only one to show up for his goodbye, then I'd be the only one to carry out what came next. But even then, deep down I felt it, that quiet tug that told me Edward's story, and mine, weren't finished yet. The morning light was thin, the kind that doesn't warm a room, just exposes it. I made tea instead of coffee. Edward always said tea was for thinking, coffee was for surviving, and that day, I needed to think. His study felt like he had only stepped out for a walk. The desk was still neat, the pens aligned, his reading glasses resting beside the lamp. I touched the leather chair and almost expected it to turn, his voice to fill the space. It didn't. The folder sat there, cream-coloured, labelled Estate. It had been there the day before, but I hadn't had the courage to open it. Now I did. Inside, everything was in Edward's handwriting, orderly, careful, dated, copies of our will, lists of accounts, insurance papers, even small notes about the garden. He'd written, "Prune the roses early April. They forgive easier when you cut them in time." I smiled sadly. That was Edward, finding metaphors in chores, but the will was what stopped me. 2 names filled the page beside mine. Michael Lewis and Diana Hartman, both listed as equal heirs. House, savings, investments. Everything divided right down the middle, just as we had agreed years ago when family still felt like a promise. I read the clause again. It felt like a stranger's handwriting now. For years, Edward and I had given them everything, help with mortgages, school loans, babysitting. Even bailouts when life just got hard. We never complained. That's what parents did. At least, that's what we thought. I remembered the night Edward looked at me across this very desk. Years ago, maybe we should teach them how to earn instead of how to ask, he'd said. And I had replied, they'll understand one day. But one day never came. I leafed through more papers, tax forms, property deeds, statements, and then a smaller envelope fell out, marked Michael. Inside a receipt from an antique shop downtown. A sale record. My breath caught when I read the item description. Mahogany clock, circa 1920. Estimated value, $2,300. The clock, the one Edward's father had brought from Ireland, the one he used to wind every Sunday after church, saying, "It's older than me, but it still keeps time." That clock had hung in our hallway for 40 years, and now, I remembered, it had gone missing last summer. Michael had said movers broke it when he was helping rearrange furniture. I had believed him, because that's what mothers do. I felt a heat rise in my chest. Not anger exactly, something older, sharper, a betrayal that had been waiting for its name. I read further. There was more. Bank transfers. Checks amounts I didn't even remember writing. 10,000 for his business idea, 5 for temporary expenses, and at the bottom of one statement, a recent withdrawal I hadn't authorized. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Edward, I'm sorry." You were right. I sat there a long time, the room quiet except for the faint ticking of the cheap replacement clock on the wall. Not the mahogany one. That one was gone. That's when I noticed a handwritten note tucked under the will. It was in Edward's hand again, but this one was different, rougher, less tidy, as if written when his strength was fading. It said, "If you find this before I'm gone, don't be angry. If you find it after, do what feels right." Love doesn't always survive the way we hope, but it leaves traces. Follow those, not guilt. I traced the ink with my thumb, the letters trembling slightly under my touch. Edward must have written this near the end, when his breathing had already grown shallow, and he knew our children might not come. I folded the note back, carefully, and looked again at the will, and I knew what I needed to do. I reached for the phone and dialed the number on the small business. Card taped to the inside cover of the folder. Helen Carter, attorney at law, old friend, old confidant. She had handled every document Edward ever signed. When she answered, her voice was calm, warm, the kind that sounded like steady ground. "Margaret," she said softly. "I was waiting to hear from you." "You were?" I asked. "Yes, Edward told me you'd call. Maybe not right away, but eventually." My throat tightened. "What did he say?" She hesitated. "Only that you'd know when you were ready." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I looked around the study again, the neat pens, the open books, the soft smell of cedar, and I realized he had planned everything. Right down to this moment. "Helen," I said quietly, "I need to make changes to our will." "Changes?" "Yes. Michael and Diana are to be removed entirely." There was a pause on the line. "Are you sure, Margaret?" "I buried my husband alone," I whispered. "And they were both alive." "So yes, I'm sure." Helen exhaled slowly. "All right. Then we'll do this properly. When can you come in?" "Tomorrow morning, after we hung up." I sat there in Edward's chair. The sunset crept in through the blinds, painting everything gold. For a second, it felt like he was there, approving quietly, like he always did when I finally made a hard choice. I looked down at the folder, still open on the desk, and something caught my eye. A photo, clipped behind the last page, Edward standing, with a young man in front of the old high school. Edward's hand rested proudly on the boy's shoulder. The boy was smiling. I didn't know him. Written on the back, in Edward's handwriting, "Evan, a good heart. Keep an eye on him. Evan, the same name that had been signed on the condolence card left at the church. I stared at it for a long moment, the edges of the photo soft between my fingers. Maybe the letter under my door hadn't come from a stranger after all. That night, I left the study door open, and for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel entirely alone, because somewhere out there, in a world that had moved on too quickly, someone still remembered the man I loved, and that, I thought, was worth starting over for. It was still early when I heard the knock. Soft at first, then again a little firmer. I almost didn't answer. People didn't knock on my door anymore, not unless it was a delivery or a mistake. When I opened it, a young man stood there. He couldn't have been more than 23, tall, but not imposing. His hair was a little messy, like he'd walked here instead of driven, and in his hands a single white rose. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said quietly. "You don't know me. My name's Evan." The name pulled something in me. Evan, the one in the photo on Edward's desk, the one Edward said had a good heart. I stepped aside. "Come in." He hesitated before crossing the threshold, as if the house itself was sacred ground, and maybe, in a way, it was. Every inch still carried Edward's presence, the faint smell of his aftershave, the photographs lining the hallway, the quiet dignity of a life well lived. Evan stood by the window, holding his hat awkwardly. "I saw the notice in the paper," he said. "I didn't know how else to pay my respects. I was one of Mr. Lewis's students." Of course. Edward had spent his life teaching history at the local high school. He never stopped talking about his students, the ones who tried, who struggled, who came from homes where no one cared whether they passed or failed. I smiled softly. "You came to his funeral, didn't you?" He nodded, eyes down. "Yes, Ma'am. I couldn't stay long. I didn't think anyone would want me there." "You were wrong," I said. He looked up, surprised. I motioned toward the living room. "Sit down." "Would you like some tea?" He smiled faintly. He used to offer that too. Always said tea makes bad news easier to swallow. I went to the kitchen, and as I poured the water, I felt the faintest tremor of peace. There was something about Evan's presence, gentle, unhurried, honest, that felt like sunlight breaking through a long winter. When I came back, he was studying the photos on the mantel. One of them, Edward and me on our 30th anniversary, had started to fade around the edges. "He talked about you a lot," Evan said. "Said you kept him honest." I chuckled softly. "That sounds like him." He sipped his tea slowly. "You know," he continued, "Mr. Lewis was the reason I didn't drop out. My dad left when I was 15. Mom worked nights. I was angry at everything. He saw it. He didn't scold me, just gave me a book one day. History of the American West. He said, 'Read this and tell me what kind of man you want to be.' My eyes stung. Edward always believed lessons were useless unless they healed something." Evan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "He used to walk me home after detention. Never told anyone. Said the world can be cruel to boys who look lost." I didn't know what to say. I had spent weeks wondering if anyone outside this family even noticed Edward was gone. Now here was proof. Quiet. Living proof that he had mattered more than I ever realized. Evan set down his cup. "Before he got sick, he helped me with college applications. I couldn't afford the fees. He said not to worry." He paused, lowering his gaze. I didn't find out until after I got my scholarship letter that he'd already paid them himself. The room seemed to still. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even the soft rattle of wind outside, all of it faded under the weight of his words. I whispered, "He never told me." Evan looked up, guilt flickering in his eyes. "I think he didn't want to. Said you'd try to talk him out of it." I smiled through the ache. He was right. I would have. We sat in silence for a while, letting memory fill the spaces words couldn't reach. Finally I asked, "Why the white rose?" He turned it gently between his fingers. He used to say white roses meant forgiveness. I wasn't a good student, Mrs. Lewis. I disappointed him more than once. I guess I wanted to say sorry. I reached across the table and touched his hand lightly. You don't owe him forgiveness. Evan, he gave it long before you asked. For the first time. He smiled fully. The kind of smile that reminded me of the boys Edward used to coach during field trips. Awkward, hopeful, fragile. When he left, I stood on the porch watching him walk down the street, shoulders slightly hunched, hands in his pockets. There was something heartbreakingly familiar about it, the way he carried both loss and gratitude at once. After he disappeared from view, I went back inside and looked again at Edward's note. Keep an eye on him. I understood now. Edward wasn't just talking about the boy. He was asking me to keep an eye on hope itself. That evening, I sat at his desk again. I opened the folder Helen had told me to bring to her office tomorrow. I looked at the line that read, Beneficiaries, and I thought of Evan's white rose lying on the table, petals beginning to curl at the edges, but still beautiful in their surrender. Maybe Edward had already chosen who deserved the legacy. Maybe I was just here to carry it out. I took a deep breath, picked up a pen, and wrote one small note on the corner of the folder. Add Evan Miller to the estate file. When I finished, I whispered into the quiet house. He mattered to more people than I knew, didn't he? The air felt lighter after that, not because grief had gone, but because something else had arrived. Purpose. And that, I realized, was the beginning of healing. The next morning, the air felt heavier. Clouds hung low over the street like grey wool. I had barely finished my breakfast when I saw the black SUV pull into the driveway. Even before she stepped out, I knew who it was. Diana never called before showing up. She arrived like a storm and without warning, without apology. She pushed open the front door before I could reach it. "Mum," she said, her voice sharp, "we need to talk." She didn't even take off her sunglasses, just marched straight into the kitchen like it still belonged to her. The same kitchen where I had made her pancakes before. School, where she used to sit at the counter, kicking her feet against the stool, telling me her little secrets about friends and crushes. That girl was long gone. "I heard from Michael," she began. Her voice was shaking, but not from sadness, from anger. "He said you're changing the will." "Is that true?" I didn't answer right away. I poured myself another cup of tea, the sound of the kettle filling the silence between us. She sighed loudly, impatient. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't just—" I cut her off quietly. "I can, and I will." She stared at me like she didn't recognize the woman in front of her. "You're doing this because we didn't come to the funeral, aren't you?" I looked at her calmly. "You didn't come to say goodbye to your father." Her voice rose. "I had work. I couldn't just cancel everything." I turned to face her fully. "You had brunch." "Diana." That stopped her. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her hands, perfectly manicured, clenched the strap of her handbag. "Don't believe everything you see online." "People post things ahead of time," she muttered. I almost laughed. "Is that what you tell yourself at night? That the lies are just scheduling errors?" For a moment the only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock. That small, steady sound filled the space between us, the sound of truth closing in. She looked down, her voice quieter now. "Dad didn't love us the way he loved his students. You know that." My heart twisted. I had waited years to hear her say something real, but not this. "Your father spent his life loving all of you," I said. "He just ran out of ways to prove it." Her chin trembled, but pride wouldn't let her cry. Instead, she snapped, "So what now?" You're giving everything to that boy? That Evan kid? You barely know him. I set the teacup down slowly. I know that he came to say goodbye. Her laugh was sharp, bitter. Oh, please, Mom, that doesn't make him family. I looked at her, steady and sad all at once. Then maybe family isn't what I thought it was. For a moment, she looked smaller, like the little girl she once was, standing on her tiptoes to reach the cookie jar, asking if Daddy was coming home early, but that softness vanished as quickly as it came. So you're cutting us off? She asked. Not cutting, I said. Pruning. There's a difference. Her jaw tightened. This isn't you. You're being manipulated. You're grieving. You're not thinking clearly. I smiled faintly. Grief has a way of clearing your mind. You see who's left standing, and who was only there for the shade. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. You think this makes you strong? It doesn't. It makes you cruel. I walked to the window, the light from outside catching on the glass. I've been everything but cruel, Diana. I was kind when I should have been firm. I gave when I should have taught. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. I turned back to her. I buried your father alone. I don't owe anyone silence anymore. Her eyes glistened, but she wouldn't let them fall. You're making a mistake, she said. Maybe, I answered. But it'll be mine to make. The house felt too small then, filled with years of unspoken things. The walls seemed to hum with old arguments, old holidays, old laughter that no longer fit. Diana grabbed her purse, her tone shifting into something colder. Well, she said, I hope that boy appreciates what you're doing, because once the lawyers are involved, this won't stay quiet. I met her gaze. It doesn't have to be loud to be right. She left then, slamming the door harder than she needed to. The sound echoed through the hallway, startling the old clock on the wall. For a long time, I just stood there, my hand resting on the back of the chair, breathing slowly. When I finally sat down, the silence felt different, heavier, but cleaner. Sometimes peace doesn't arrive. Softly. Sometimes it storms through. The door wearing your daughter's perfume and slams its way out. The phone rang a few minutes later. I didn't even have to check the caller. ID Michael. Mom, his voice said, smooth but tight. We need to talk. I'm listening, I said. I heard you're cutting us out. I don't know what's gotten into you, but you can't just erase your family. I didn't, I replied. You did. Come on, he scoffed. You're upset. You're lonely. You're letting strangers fill your head. I closed my eyes. His voice too familiar, too polished. Michael, I said softly, you didn't come to your father's funeral. There was a pause. Something came up, he muttered. Something always does, I said, and hung up. Afterward, I stood by the window watching the grey sky turn pale. It was raining lightly now, a steady drizzle that made everything outside shimmer and blur. The kind of rain Edward loved. The quiet kind. He used to say it washed things clean without asking permission. I thought about that as I walked to the study and opened the estate folder again. I picked up my pen and, next to Evan's name, I drew a small check mark, a decision sealed not by anger, but by peace. When I looked up, the garden outside was misted in silver light. For the first time in months, I could almost imagine the roses blooming again. Maybe forgiveness was just another word for beginning over. The day after Diana's visit, I woke to the sound of soft rain on the windows. It wasn't the kind that ruins your plans, just the kind that asks you to slow down, the kind Edward used to, love. The house smelled faintly of his aftershave again. Don't know if it was memory playing tricks, or if grief has its own scent that lingers after love is gone. I made tea, then wandered down the hallway, letting my fingers brush the wall as I passed. Edward's study door was still slightly ajar, the Light slanted across the floor just enough to touch the edge of the old oak desk. I hadn't gone in since the argument with Diana, but something about that morning felt different, like the house itself was calling me in. I sat down at the desk and opened the bottom drawer, the one Edward always said was for things that matter, but never fit anywhere else. Inside were receipts, postcards, and a small wooden box with a brass latch. I almost didn't open it, but I did. Inside was an envelope, sealed with red wax. On the front, in Edward's handwriting, were the words, "For Margaret, when I'm gone." My breath caught. I traced the letters with my thumb, the loops and curves so familiar it almost felt like touching his hand again. For a long moment, I just stared at it, afraid to open it, because once I did, there would be no more surprises left of him, but curiosity is stronger than fear. I broke the seal. The letter was dated 8 months before he died. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, but the ink was steady. Edward's voice, frozen in time. It read, "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, I've gone where the noise finally quiets. Don't cry too long, love. I've had a full life, and you've been the best part of every bit of it. I don't know how the children will handle my passing. I've watched them drift away from us further each year. Not out of hate, but out of comfort. Comfort is a slow poison, you know. It makes people forget who fed them when they were hungry. Don't chase them. You've done enough." There's a folder in the bottom drawer of my desk marked "The Quiet Legacy." Inside, you'll find what I couldn't bring myself to tell you while I was alive. You'll also find a name, Evan Miller. Keep him close. He reminded me what decency looks like when the world forgets it. Maggie, if love has turned to silence around you, that doesn't mean it's gone. Sometimes it just waits for a kinder echo. By the time I reached the end, my vision blurred. The paper was damp from my tears. I pressed it against my heart, whispering, "Oh, Edward." "You knew, didn't you?" I opened the second drawer, the one he mentioned. There it was, a plain manila folder labelled "The Quiet Legacy." Inside were several documents, a notarized form, a set of bank statements, and a handwritten note to our attorney, Helen. The note said simply, "If Margaret asks, tell her the foundation should go to whoever. She trusts most to continue it." I flipped through the pages, until I found a short description of the foundation itself. It wasn't for the children. It wasn't for family at all. It was a small education fund Edward had set up in secret, meant to help struggling students pay for college, and the first recipient listed was Evan Miller. I leaned back in the chair, letting that truth sink in. Edward had already started what I'd only just begun to understand. He'd built a legacy based on gratitude, not blood. The room felt alive with his presence. I could almost hear him, that gentle voice that always knew how to calm my storms. "You see now, don't you, Maggie? We leave behind what we love, not who we're told to." I smiled through my tears. "Yes, Edward," I whispered. "I see it now." Later that afternoon, I called Helen. When she answered, I told her about the letter, the foundation, and Evan. She listened quietly, then said, "He spoke to me about that fund before he passed. Said it was his way of teaching one last class." A soft laugh escaped me. "That sounds like him," Helen continued. "What do you want to do with it, Margaret?" I looked around the study, my eyes landing on the white rose Evan had left. It was wilted now, but still beautiful. "I want to continue it," I said, "and I want Evan to be part of it. Maybe even lead it someday." Helen was quiet for a moment, then replied gently, "Edward would be proud." After I hung up, I sat by the window as the rain began again. Heavier this time, drops slid down the glass, like they were racing each other to the sill. The garden outside blurred into watercolour shades of green and grey. That's when I noticed something small, a sprout pushing through the damp. Soil where Edward's roses used to grow, just one, but alive. I smiled. Maybe the garden knew before I did. Maybe it understood that love, when tended quietly, always grows back. As dusk fell, I placed Edward's letter back in its envelope and locked it in the wooden box, not to hide it, but to keep it safe. Then I whispered, "You can rest now, my love. I'll take it from here." The next morning, I wrote another letter, this one to Evan, short, simple, handwritten like Edward would have done. "Dear Evan, thank you for remembering him. I found something he left behind, something meant for you. Come by when you can. We have work to do." When I sealed that envelope, I felt something inside me settle, not closure exactly, something softer, peace, maybe. For the first time since the funeral, I slept through the night without waking, and in my dream, Edward was standing by the garden fence, smiling, holding a white rose in his hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Because love, the real kind, doesn't end. It just changes its address. The day they came back, the sun was shining, but it felt cold. I was in the garden, pruning the new sprout that had grown from Edward's old rose bush, when I heard tyres crunching on the gravel. 2 cars this time. Not one. I stood up, brushed the dirt off my hands, and waited. Michael got out first in his crisp grey suit, the same one he wore to business conferences, but never to family dinners. Diana followed, phone in hand, tapping nervously at the screen. And then a third person stepped out, a woman in a navy blazer, briefcase in hand, their lawyer. So this was how they'd chosen to come back to me, not with flowers, not with apologies, but with paperwork. "Mom," Michael started, his voice tight, polite. "We thought it would be best if we discussed everything face to face." "Civilly." "Civilly," I repeated. "That's a new word for this family." Diana's eyes darted to the lawyer. "We're not here to fight," she said quickly. "We just want to understand." The lawyer, a young woman with sharp eyes and too much perfume, smiled thinly. "Mrs. Lewis, your children have concerns about the recent changes to your estate. Given your age and emotional state after your husband's passing, they worry you might have been unduly influenced." I looked at her. "By whom?" She hesitated. "By outsiders, specifically, a young man named Evan Miller." The name hit the air like a spark. Evan. The boy who showed up when no one else did. The only one who remembered Edward without needing a reason. I took a deep breath. "Steady. Come inside," I said. They followed me into the living room, a place that used to hold laughter and holiday chaos. Now it held truth. And truth, I've learned, doesn't need to raise its voice. Michael sat on the edge of the couch, adjusting his tie. Diana stayed standing. Arms crossed, their lawyer pulled out her files like weapons. "I assume you've brought your attorney as well?" she asked. "I don't need one," I said calmly. "Edward already wrote mine." That made her pause. Walked to the study and came back holding the small wooden box, the one with Edward's letter. Inside, I placed it on the table and sat down. Opposite them, this house, I began softly, was built on love, not money. Every brick, every nail, every coat of paint, your father touched them with his hands. You know what he never touched? They were silent. The inheritance. Michael frowned. "Mum, we're not trying to take anything from you. I cut him off gently. Yes, you are. You already did. Piece by piece. Over the years. Every check, every favour, every forgotten birthday, every unreturned call. You took what mattered most, and left the rest for me to bury." Diana's face hardened. "We were busy living our lives." "No," I said quietly. You were busy escaping your conscience. The words hung in the air like a bell's echo. Michael shifted uncomfortably. We just don't understand why you'd give everything to a stranger. I opened the box and took out Edward's letter. This isn't a stranger's story, I said. This is your father's. I handed the letter to the lawyer. Her eyes scanned the page. Her expression softened slightly. Then she read aloud, just a few lines. If love has turned to silence around you, that doesn't mean it's gone. Sometimes it just waits for a kinder echo. Diana's voice cracked. What is that supposed to mean? It means, I said, that your father saw what was coming. He knew this house would grow quiet, not because we stopped loving each other, but because we stopped showing it. I turned to Michael. Do you know what your father did in the months before he died? He shook his head slowly. He started a foundation, the Quiet Legacy, a scholarship for students who needed a second chance. He wanted to leave something that mattered. Diana blinked. So you're giving it all to charity? No, I said. I'm giving it to purpose, and to the one person who showed up when you didn't. Her face flushed. That boy doesn't deserve it. Neither did you, I said softly. The room went still. Michael exhaled, long and low. So that's it? After everything we've done for you, I couldn't help it. I laughed. Everything you've done for me? You mean the bills I paid? The favours I gave? The years I carried your burdens while you treated love like an expense account? He looked away, shame flickering across his face, but it was gone just as quickly. The lawyer closed her folder quietly. I think we're done here, she said softly. Her voice wasn't sharp anymore. It was careful, respectful. She stood, nodded at me once and left. When the door closed, the silence that followed was heavy. Diana was crying now, not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears, she whispered. We didn't mean to hurt you. I know, I said. You just forgot to care. She looked at me then, really looked, like she was seeing me for the first time in years. I don't know how to fix this, she said. Start by showing up, I answered. For someone else. It's too late for your father, but not for the world he believed in. Michael stood defeated. Are you really going to do this? I nodded. It's already done. They left without another word. No slamming this time, just quiet steps fading down the hall. When the sound was gone, I walked back to the garden. The sun had come out again, turning the wet leaves into small mirrors. The new rosebud had opened fully, white, pure and trembling in the wind. I knelt beside it, touched the petals gently and whispered, It's done, Edward. The reckoning's over. Behind me I heard footsteps on the gravel. I turned. Evan stood there holding an envelope. Mrs. Lewis, he said softly. The scholarship papers are ready. We can start next week, I smiled. You've done well, Evan. He looked at the rose and nodded. I think he'd be proud. Yes, I whispered. I think he already is. As he left, the breeze carried the faintest scent of roses through the air. I looked up at the sky. Open, endless, forgiving, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for anything, because peace had finally come home. Family isn't always who shares your name. Sometimes it's who shows up when the world goes quiet. I used to think forgiveness meant letting others back in. Now I know it means letting yourself move on. Edward once told me peace doesn't knock. You have to open the door for it. And after all these years, I finally did. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, remember this. Love that's taken for granted isn't love lost. It's love waiting for a place to bloom again. So don't wait to be remembered. Start remembering yourself. And if this story touched something in you, stay with us. Subscribe and keep listening. You're not alone.